Okay, let's talk about dust.
Hi, welcome. Come on in, pull up a seat. If you're new here, my name is Dan, and if you're not, you already knew that. Let's talk saw blades for the radial arm saw. Now, the first thing you're likely to hear when it comes to saw blades for your radial arm saw is about tooth rake. And actually, no. The first thing you're likely to hear when it comes to saw blades for your radial arm saw is some radial arm saw aficionado that says, I only use one blade for every cut I make, whether it's cross cuts or rip cuts. You need to get this blade, and it's the only blade you'll ever need. And that's bullshit. Just like different saws are made for different types of work, different blades are made for different types of work. But let's talk about tooth rake first. Now, the rake of a tooth is simply the angle of the tooth relative to a center line on the blade. If it's raked forward, that's a positive rake. If it's angled backwards, that's a negative rake. Positive rake teeth cut more quickly and more aggressively. Negative rake teeth, words are hard. Negative rake teeth cut more slowly and they tend to leave a cleaner cut. Where this really matters most is when you're cross cutting. When you're rip cutting on a radial arm saw, I don't think it matters what the rake is, personally. Why it matters when you're cross cutting is because it makes the cut less aggressive when you're using a negative rake. So there's much less of a tendency for the blade to pull towards you as you're pulling it through the work. Now, when you're rip cutting, the blade carriage is fixed in place and you're feeding the workpiece through. So the rake on the angle on the tooth doesn't matter at all. In fact, this is my ripping blade right here, and it is an aggressively positively raked tooth. You can see in some of my other videos, it ripped just fine without causing any problems. The going wisdom is you need to have a 5-degree negative rake tooth on your radial arm saw. And while I think that's a very sensible default position, it's not absolutely necessary. So if you don't have access to a negative rake blade, although you probably should be able to get one, it's fine to use a positive rake or even a neutral rake straight up and down. You just have to be aware that the saw carriage is going to tend to come towards you with a little bit more energy, but it's still very controllable. The next thing you need to be aware of when it comes to blades on a radial arm saw is the kerf. And the kerf is really just the thickness of the blade. Actually, it's the thickness of the tooth. It's the thickness of the cut it's going to make. The teeth on a saw blade are actually very slightly wider than the blade itself. If you didn't do that, the blade would just bind as you tried to run it through. This is a full kerf blade. And this is a thin kerf blade. And you're not going to be able to see the difference here, but I'll put a graphic up. Generally speaking, you want to use thin kerf blades. And for cross cutting, that's fine. And why you want to do that is you're taking out less material. So it applies less force as you're making the cut. And once again, less likely to jump forward through the cut. Where I ran into a problem with this, with my radial arm saw, is with the riving knife. This saw was designed to use a full kerf blade. I'm not even sure thin kerf blades existed when this was made, but it certainly wasn't made for one. The upshot of that is, as I was ripping, the kerf was slightly off to the side. So this was not making good engagement, and I had to wiggle the end to get it to feed through straight. So when I rip, I have to use a full kerf blade on this saw. To do cross cutting, I can use a thin kerf blade. All right, let's talk quickly about the different types of blades that are available. And if you want more information, you can do a deep dive on YouTube. There's plenty of videos that explain in depth what all these different blades do. But to cover it briefly, this is a rip blade. There's fewer teeth, and the gullets between them are deep and wide to move out lots of material. Obviously, this is what you use for making rip cuts. This is a crosscut blade. In fact, it is a finishing blade. This has a negative rake on the teeth. The teeth are smaller. There's a lot more of them, and the gullets are smaller. This is going to give you a much cleaner cut when you're cross-cutting than a rip blade will, but it's not as good for ripping. But what if you can only afford one blade. Again, remember, I am focused on keeping this budget friendly. If you can only afford one blade, you should get a combination blade. This has a combination of ripping teeth and cross-cutting teeth. And it's got these little woodleys here, and I forget the name of those, but those help prevent kickback. You can see this is a ripping tooth with a big gullet behind it, and these four here are smaller cross-cutting teeth. It does ripping okay, it does cross-cutting okay, but it doesn't do either as good as a dedicated blade would do it. Again, if you can only afford one blade, this is the type of blade you want to get. If you can find it in a negative rake, that's a little bit better for your cross-cutting, but it's not absolutely necessary. The other thing about radial arm saws and blades that I think is absolutely critical to talk about is blade guard safety. A lot of radial arm saws like this one only have a guard from the factory that covers half the blade, which means that this half of the blade is exposed no matter what kind of cut you're doing. I think it's absolutely worth your time or worth the money to make or buy an additional blade guard to go over the blade. This is one I made myself. I'll see if I can include a link to the templates for these. I just cut these out of 1/8-inch acrylic panel that you can get from your big box stores or off Amazon or Walmart or wherever. It's really easy to cut and work with, and this slides up out of the way. So it hangs down, but as it's making a cut, it's lifted up, and then when the workpiece passes through, it drops down and covers the blade. The purpose of these is to avoid inadvertent contact with the blade. As it's winding down, if your hand happens to be over here somewhere, if you slip, you're not going to bump into the blade because you've got this plastic guard in the way. It will not protect your hand if it's directly in line with the blade. This is still going to lift up, and it's going to chew through your fingers in a heartbeat. Again, this is basic radial arm saw safety. I may have already touched on this. I'm going to talk about it some more in the videos where I demonstrate the different cuts that we can do. But always keep your hands away from the path of the travel of the blade. Fine. But absolutely, a blade guard is cheap and easy to make and very good bit of insurance. Oh, so much dust. Look, there's no way around it. Radial arm saws are dusty pieces of equipment. So let's talk about what you can do to mitigate that. Every radial arm saw that I know of has a dust chute like this coming off the blade guard. So minimally what you want to do is control the dust coming out of there. And the best way to do that really is to hook up a vacuum hose or a dust collection hose to it. Now I found this little bit of PVC pipe that fits into the dust collection and into my vacuum hose like this. That helps. It's not going to fix everything because there's still a lot of dust that's flying that doesn't come out through the chute, but that's where you're going to start. And if you are using a shop vac to do your dust collection, then you absolutely need one of these or something very much like it. There's a lot of different styles that are out there. I get this one off Amazon for like 40 bucks. They all do basically the same thing. The air is drawn into the bucket first, and then it spins it. That slows down the airflow, and then the heavier particles fall out into the bucket and don't go on through to your vacuum. That will save you from having to replace your vacuum bag every day or two, and you'll almost never need to replace the filter in the vacuum, possibly never at all. Now, like I said, that only covers part of the dust collection. You still get a lot coming out from the saw blade that doesn't get sucked down through that chute. What to do about that? Well, the first thing I tried was just simply putting a piece of plywood behind the saw blade to serve as a backstop. That doesn't reduce the amount of dust coming out, but it does kind of keep it contained mostly to the top of the saw where you can vacuum it up or brush it off. Now, another thing that people like to do is to build dust chutes or dust collections that they can hook up to their vacuum or their dust collection and try and catch that dust and bring it in. This is a prototype that I have made. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of different designs for these things online. And just in addition, don't sleep on foam core board as a prototype material. This is the same size as 1/4-inch thick plywood. It's super inexpensive, super easy to work with, and not messy. So prototype with this stuff for something you're going to build out of plywood and you're not sure how to do it yet. Now, I haven't used this one yet. I'll probably post an update short at some point to let you know how well it works. But as you can see, it goes in behind the blade there, and it's got the dust collection chute, and I've hooked it up to the vacuum over here. So will it work? I don't know if it'll work, but we'll find out. And that is really about it for this video. We covered blade selection, blade guard safety, and dust collection. And in the next video, actually in the next 3 videos in this series, we're going to cover doing cross cuts, doing rip cuts, and then doing some basic joinery. So remember to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video, okay?